Hello. I didn't see you sitting in the front row. You going back to school? You're going back to school? Well, you know, it's all right. Hi, everybody. You exhausted yet? No. We're into one, and this year we're going to No Country. And if you followed the unit for the last 5 years, we are obsessed with America. Why, I'm not quite sure, but it's a fascinating place for any of you who haven't been. Architecturally amazing, and the speculative opportunities are beyond the realm of fascinating in my eyes and Mark's eyes. We're also slightly personally fascinated with America, so you know you have to be careful hanging out with us because we get really American. Although the AA is run by Americans, I've noticed. But we're not going anymore, not after this year anyway. This is it, 5 years and we are over. So this year is going to be our most exciting journey to America. And I can't get the movie to work. So let's try. Joel. Technical glitch. I did press play. But it should play automatically. Okay, well that wasn't a very good start, was it? Should I try again? After all, America's all about movies, isn't it? The movie industry comes from there. So we have to start again. Hey, I thought you were my technical guru. No, no. You're not? What are you then? To you? Yeah, technical guru.
Which one?
We've got lots of movies, so it's not much point having a presentation without any movies. Tell you all a joke about America, okay?
Where is it then?
The other day my daughter says to me, Daddy, I've got 2 passports. I say, what are they? She said, well, one's American, one's British. I say, great, so you speak 2 languages? She says, yeah. I speak English and Marrakesh. Marrakesh? What's that language? I says, well, we went to Marrakesh on holiday this year. I said, no, we went to Marrakesh. That's Morocco. She's like, oh, but they speak a different language, English. And I was like, yeah, your mother speaks a different language as well. She's American. I think when you go to America, what you find out is Americans and the English, they don't speak the same language. It just sounds the same. So anytime Brett tells you something, okay, you've got to think
the one that we've just
importantly about the nuance of what he's saying.
Yeah, but I'm sure it is. I'm sure it is.
I think we should just...
Where did you make that?
Not getting very far. Got any more jokes? Yeah.
No, yeah. No, that's it. Oh, God. Where is it? So, it should show up.
It's not black.
Yeah. No, the hard drive should show up.
Let's try plugging it in again. What is that movie? It's so weird because, I mean, we copied everything on.
No, that's
It's in your...
the thing that I copied over.
Yeah.
So my hard drive is a Seagate.
Your hard drive isn't showing up. It's in the Finder. Yeah.
Should we just do it without?
How is this remote? But there's nothing.
No, that's
nothing. No.
I don't know when this should show up, right? Cancel that. So we don't want that, just cancel that.
Looks like the movie as an asset and come over with it.
Yeah, but no, I don't know. So but I don't know where the drive is because the drive's not anywhere, right? Because that's my drive, obviously.
What is this the stuff you need?
No, that's the stuff that was copied over. This is on here,
Right.
which is not showing up on your computer.
What about the keynote? Is that the one you're playing it from?
Yeah, that was all we were playing it from. It's the sound and word. So if you do that.
Yeah, but keynote's gonna.
Yeah, but that was the one we were playing, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
everything's there.
The keynote's gonna is a little bit better at containing the media. Is this fast? So the stuff should be there. Did you make it in Keynote?
Yeah, I made it in Keynote and exported it. So that's,
We didn't open Keynote, we opened
Yeah,
PowerPoint.
but keynote.
it was Keynote and it didn't have the films in it. See, they can't find the films. But your computer can't read mine.
Do you think so? I don't know why we're getting all these PowerPoints.
Yeah, it's because I exported this PowerPoint. But see, if you go to that one, you click on that. Now that's actually a film, but it's not playing either. See, it's a whole. I mean, I have a copy of it. No, it's all.
These, no, I'm not being funny, but these aren't movies. These cannot be this small and be QuickTime movies. I'm sorry.
Well,
They're, whatever they are, they're references to them, right? It sees it as
I
a...
exported it. Okay, we'll just have to do it without the film.
Hang on.
We'll just do it without the film.
I mean, I'd go back to what you have, to be honest.
Yeah.
If this is seeing this,
No.
then it ain't going to do it.
Yeah.
I don't know what the beef is with this baby.
I don't know. It works fine on mine.
I'll see if I can get it going on mine. Put that back up to it.
thing and run the movie independently.
Doesn't work like that.
Huh?
Because the thing is, it won't read this drive on there, so I can't even copy them across to there. So, what I can do, I'll try while you're talking to put some of them on here in there so we can.
We've copied that over. Is there anywhere else where those movies exist?
Yeah, they're on my computer. I'll copy them onto here. Then we can see try play. Yeah, they're on here, but I'll try putting them in there. Oh, this thing for it, isn't it?
All I really need
Very smart.
I always look like this. I dress like this every day. That's what everybody says.
No one's
I'm
really
like,
impressed then, are they?
no, nobody's definitely going to be impressed. Okay.
Oh, dear.
Okay, let's try again. So I'll go back to No Country, but I won't really talk about it very much. And now I don't have any movies to show you, which is such a shame. Exactly. No video in America. What a shame. Anyway, as I said, we're interested in America, but this year, it's the last time we're going there. And there's a reason for that, but we'll tell you about that later. So this was a movie about America, which was to give you an idea on why America is so fascinating to all of us. But instead, I'll talk about our agenda, which is sort of why we go to America and what the implication is for our unit and the work we're trying to get out of it. So we perform functions on our journey in the United States, and to paraphrase Raina Banham, we will act as archaeologists of the immediate future. Well, that's one thing we can do. The provocation for citing the unit in the US originated from a quote by a French guy named Jean Baudrillard, where he suggests in his writings that America is the original version of modernity, where we, the Europeans, are the subtitled version. America has no past, it lives in the perpetual present. So our fascination is two-part. One as cultural progenitor, which is about the manufacture of images, and secondly, as compromised or perhaps even obsolete nature of the country in which we visit. While the US in the 20th century was probably the most economic, science and cultural force in the world, in this recent decade, its influence is indisputably waning. With the rise of economic powers like China and India, the US is approaching a kind of unplanned obsolescence, which you can see here in some photographs from Detroit, where we visited a couple of years ago. So Detroit, I read in the newspaper on Sunday, is a place in America where you can buy a house which is 40 times less expensive than one in Los Angeles. So there's a reason for this failure of parts of America. The US is, of course, obsessed by its own decline, and there are so many texts written about the failure of American society and what they used to be. And I think this is something that we as a unit take quite literally when we travel. We like to, I suppose, get investigations in the specific. So this, for instance, is an investigation by Juliette Haysom from a few years ago, where she looked at a former airfield in eastern California in the Imperial Valley near the Salton Sea, where the airfield was built but never really used. So there's an obsolescence built into the architecture that exists out in the desert. Or the likes of this from last year, where we visited the once grand Borscht Belt resorts in upstate New York, where they hold on to a sense of grandeur through the likes of decay, which is prevalent in all of the structures that we visit. We also were interested in occupation in parts of America, the parts of America where we visit. The modern America is inhabited by nuanced edges of society. In this way, we're interested in the manner in which the architecture operates in larger systems, whether they be socio-cultural, technical, or historical. We consider architecture in reaction to cultures or the user groups who inhabit these remnant architectures. These users often compromise of oddballs, eccentrics that we might discover on our journeys. The drifters, the gun-toting retirees, chain-smoking housewives, religious maniacs, and even lost tourists, which is what we could be on our journey. Hopefully this year we'll discover some more. I think, just to give you a tiny bit of background before we move on. So Mark and I have run this unit for 5 years. I'm a practicing architect and I run a practice called Satellite, and we build lots of very small but fun buildings. This one just won an RIBA award 3 weeks ago. I studied at the Bartlett under Peter Cook, who's the founder of Archigram, and I taught there for 12 years, and this is the 5th year I've been teaching at the AA with Mark.
So, despite the image, I'm not very good with technology. But however, we should have some of the films. So I've taught here for a number of years. I started in the diploma history program, which I continue to teach in. I also teach in the master's and PhD programs here. And I received my PhD from Princeton. And I also have practiced architecture for quite a long time. So just a little bit about the unit now. So in terms of the brief, I think what's most essential is that we don't really have a particular set brief. What we do is we negotiate with each of the students within the unit so that they look towards building their own brief, or they look towards articulating what they want to do within the remit of the unit. So in that regard, we're both kind of very open to a number of suggestions. And we also, what that does, we find, is it fosters a degree of diversity and difference within the unit, which is something we really like. So traditionally we have very different projects within the same year, which for us is interesting because we look at these kind of very diverse and very interesting sites. So one of the ways to approach that diversity is to have a diverse number of projects. So that fosters the conversations within the unit. So obviously essential to that is this notion of location. So these are just some documents that people have produced in terms of the places we've been. So this is the Mississippi, which was the genesis pretty much of this iteration of the unit, where we looked at the sort of amazing kind of landscape of complication, let's put it, let's not charge it too much, before we went to the Salton Sea, as Stewart explained, which is this kind of amazing accidental lake in the United States. So it's where the Colorado was accidentally diverted for 3 years in the early 1900s, and it formed this enormous sea in the desert, which was stocked with fish, became a kind of playground for modern architecture. And then because it's the desert, it gets very hot, the fish die, it rots, it smells. So it's actually, as beautiful as it is, and it is exceptionally beautiful, it's uninhabitable. So we engaged with what it was to exist in these very strange, kind of oddball environments. And of course, the poster child for all of this is Detroit, which we went to a couple of years ago. And then, as Stewart was saying, last year we went to this extremely wonderful place in the Catskills, which are these hotels which are now following the collapse of them. And these were enormously successful resorts. So Grossinger's, which is this resort here, was hosting 200,000-300,000 people per summer. And immediately after it closed, of course, it becomes overwhelmed by nature. And it's fascinating, that relationship, especially within the US, which of course is an enormous country, of the relationship between nature as this kind of malevolent force and architecture is something that needs to resist that. And of course, when it doesn't, it breaks down like that. So obviously, this is the tennis court, which is not fit for purpose, in the English expression. So essential within that is the way in which we formulate these things. So we do kind of research or investigations or have conversations about various materials. Obviously, we look at precedents of what it is to architecturally engage with these kind of materials. So we look at, Las Vegas studio, and we look at a number of films. But part of the notion for the unit is if the US, which as Stewart was saying, is kind of progenitor of images, one of the ways we think we know it, like the way we think we know anything, is through images. So we look at the history of photography in the United States and then also to cinema. So if it'll work, let's see if we can do this. I have a clip here from, let's see if I can open it. Let's try something. Which fingers crossed will work. Try to do this in here. Okay, that doesn't work. But anyway, what I'll do is we'll put all of the clips we have on the website so you can see them. So the introductory clip was the one that's on now with No Country, but this film here, which I'll just briefly discuss, this is one of the central works we look at, which is Terry Malick's astonishing 1978 film, which is set in the Panhandle in Texas, which is this, it's incredibly beautiful evocation of what that relationship between the landscape, farming, architecture, human habitation is. And of course, within the cycle of the film, just to spoil it for you, is there's a kind of, there's a plague of locusts that destroy the crops. So it has these sort of astonishing scenes of the fields being destroyed and these kind of things. We also look, of course, at a number of sort of art precedents for this, like Duchamp, Tom Sachs, who's an old student here, who's been working for a number of years on reconstructing his version of the space program, which is kind of like a really funny reinvention of what NASA is. So this is one of his interventions he started. He started with the Apollo, now he's on Mars. I think he's going to even more off-world. We obviously look at a number of key texts like Banham's American Deserter, a very strange late book from '86. It's a famous photo of him riding in the desert. We look at Baudrillard, of course, and his notion, which is really critical, which is very interesting, that he both speaks of how America is a highly artificial paradise, like all paradises, because of course it's a construction, but then also within that, it's the only paradise we have, which is kind of essential. That's a theme that we've looked at for the entire course of the unit, and that's the compromise, that if it's something we look towards, it's something like all types of aspirations, it's flawed. And architecture, that's interesting to deal with in terms of, rather than as a kind of particularly inventive or utopianist project, it's one that deals with something that's in a great degree of complication. So of course we look also at, this is my favorite TS example, Joseph Boyce, who lived with a coyote for a weekend. And I Like America and America Likes Me, a tremendous project. And this is a recently examined piece of fantastic research, which we'll discuss, which is Ed Ruscha's tremendous 1968 project, Royal Road Test, in which, in response to his reading of Jack Kerouac's On the Road, the classic American road novel, Ruscha bought a sort of he bought a real one, but he bought a copy of a Royal 10 typewriter, which he then threw out of a car as he was driving 90 miles an hour down a state highway in the United States. So this is this wonderful, the caption's terrific. He sort of, that's where it landed, and then it bounced off, and then it's rigorously documented in terms of the artifacts it leaves on the landscape. And one way to look at that would be, of course, to say architecturally, architecture just becomes these remnants on the landscape. But you see within this example, how intelligent it is, how funny, which is crucial to the unit, and how well documented it becomes. So this is other examples of early research we've done. This is Bella's one. This is NA's project from last year, where he imagined the way in which these civilizations are haunted by the images of these architectures. So what he did is, because this town in Liberty is haunted by Grossinger's, which is on the hill, he looked at what it would be following a reading of Guy Maupassant, who the French writer who famously hated the Eiffel Tower, he despised it, So Maupassant, being brilliant, figured out the best way to not see the Eiffel Tower was every day to have lunch in it. Because of course you can't see the thing you yourself are in. So NA then produced a project, which we'll see a little later on, where he took the entire town that is haunted by this image of failure and placed it within that image so it can't see itself, which was so brilliant he just won a big student award. So he got first out of 650 international entries, so well done him. So another example is Andrea's one, where she goes from a sort of slightly dryish consideration of what Detroit is in terms of manufacturing, to looking at the way in which property in the city becomes a site of contestation, to then reimagine in this kind of terrific way what it was if the failed bid for the Olympics had actually come to Detroit, and whether it would have changed anything, which of course it wouldn't, but you know, would have made nice images. And then of course this is all compiled, so this is some of the old photo research. This is Chris Johnson's fantastic defense manual he created as part of his project for a paranoid character he met and stayed with, which is not recommended, and Seb's terrific photo documentation of last year. So you see the way in which, you know, the field trip becomes vital in collecting this information. This initial formulation then leads on to a speculation, which, as you can see here, is this kind of way in which each student then develops out what their ideas are through a kind of series of collages, drawings, projects. There's some previous ones. The computer's sticking to. This is Bella's project from several years ago, and this is an example of a third year one where she goes from the initial scheme, which is what is a modernist house, onto a series of prototypes, onto. Oh, sorry about this. Never use Keynote, it's a piece of shit. As is PowerPoint, so shouldn't we? So what she did, she developed these prototypes and then created these sort of really beautiful interventions. So this is one of her favorites. This is a speed house, which is following a Mesian thing, is designed so that as a car passes by, the wall of the house ripples. And the entire house is just this wall that passes by that speaks of speed that, of course, being a third year, she then developed up into her TS.
So I think, speaking of TS for third years, I think what's really interesting about TS for us is that it's integral to the projects we do. We don't want you to do a TS which is outside of the scope of the unit. So if you take this one from Chen, which was back in the Mississippi, which is all about the nature of flotation, what we're looking for this year from third years is what is Texas famed for and how might you draw on that for your TS? So, you know, there's an oil industry in Texas, there's a lot of guns, there's a lot of rodeo, and there's a lot of desert, so there's quite a lot of things to engage with for TS, and I think we just really want it to have this integrated process where the drawings for TS and the drawings for the project become the same thing, so you don't need to do something as a side, and I think that's really important. And you know, this type of solution is the project, which just happened to be a very successful TS, which ended. So our timetable, we do quite a bit of traveling, which is fun. There you go, there's a dry timetable for you. So we're going to start by going to Folkestone on Friday, which is a slightly abandoned town in southeast England, which used to be very focused on travel to France. It no longer is, and it's trying to regenerate itself. And what's interesting is that it has a really strong history connecting to the Second World War. It also has a lot of history connected to the railway. We actually, NA went there last year, and this was a series of photographs he took from Folkestone. So you can see there's some quite interesting, there's a Martello tower on the top in the middle, and the tower on the top left is from the ferries. Pretty fascinating place, so we're going to go there. And it has a lot of artists there. So at the moment, there's the Folkestone Triennale, which, so Tassa Dedeen, Alex Hartley, who is doing a thing called Vigil on this quite grand hotel there, where he's put a series of encampments at the top of this hotel, and he sits there for 6 to 8 weeks, I think it is, on top of this, making a record of everything that goes on in the town of Folkestone. Or this guy, Tim Etchells, who's done a light project in the old railway station at Folkestone, which was where the train went right to the edge of the ferry and then onto it, and it took the people to France, but that's obviously died some time ago. And from there, in late October, we're going to go to the United States, and we're going to Texas. So Texas is a very big place. We're going to the Texas Triangle, which basically gives you a triangulation of all the main conurbations of Texas. And if you could listen to this, this is a fascinating film by Richard Linklater called Bernie, and it's where a guy explains the nature of Texas being divided into what he calls 5 states. So he calls it the People's Republic of Austin, which is basically a hippie town. He talks about East Texas, which is where the oil started. He talks about Southwest Texas on the Gulf, where it's an urban conurbation that has no planning, and it was battered by the storms, Hurricane Katrina, Hurricane Ike. And then he talks about the snobbish side of Texas in Dallas in the north, where they're all rich gun-toting Texans with Stetsons. But it's a shame I can't show you. So we're going to start in Dallas-Fort Worth, where we're going to fly in at the end of October, and we're going to go and see Louis Kahn. Well, not him personally. We're going to go to the Campbell Art Museum, which is one of my favorite buildings, and I've never seen it, which is quite amazing building. Last year we went to Yale to see a series of Kahn buildings, and this one's particularly spectacular. I don't know if any of you saw the Kahn Museum at the Design Museum recently, the Kahn exhibition, but some pretty impressive stuff in there. Then we're going to traverse Texas, so we might do it in a car, we might do it in train, we might do it in a mix of both, but we're looking at experience in the Texan landscape. And we're going to MARFA. So MARFA's a town which was effectively, it's an old cowboy town, and it was bought effectively by the artist Donald Judd, and he made his life there. So it used to look like this, and he bought it, and now it looks like this, and it has his house, his studio, the Art Foundation, the Judd Foundation. It has also the Chinati Foundation, which is another foundation set up, partly funded by Judd himself, and partly by some other people. And there's a series of artworks we're going to see there. They also have a really cool Prada store for you all to go shopping. Not that you can buy anything there, but so that's staying there for a while by Michael Elgrim. We're going to go and see that. It's in a place just outside of MARFA. And actually we're going to go and see the MARFA lights, which is a weird phenomenon, a bit like the Northern Lights, where you stand on these platforms and they create this metallic interaction with the desert, which is supposedly quite amazing. Permian Basin, which is in East Texas, which is where you'll see a lot of oil. So the Midland Basin, Delaware Basin, they're all part of the Permian Basin, which is where 2 tectonic plates in America touched. And the idea is there's these massive oil reservoirs. So this is where you see a very traditional way of Texans digging oil, which are these things. So these are called derricks, and they dig oil out the ground, and people used these when they were prospecting for oil in Texas in the early 1900s. But it isn't where oil was discovered. It was discovered in the other side of Texas. But you get these, and this one's quite fascinating because it's obviously an oil rig sitting in the middle of a cotton field. Then we're going to go to Austin, which is the state capital. And Austin is supposedly the only hip place in Texas. It's pretty fascinating. We're going to go and stay in an amazing old hotel in Austin. Then we're going to drive across to Houston, which is on the Gulf Coast. You'll all have heard of Houston. It's Space City. It's where the space shuttle used to come back to Earth, controlled by NASA. And it's a massive conurbation. It's also where Rice University is. So we're going to the School of Architecture at Rice, where we're going to spend a day on a jury with the third years at Rice University with some friends of ours who teach there. And we're going to see some of the, well, we've been invited to the homecoming football game, which should be quite entertaining, Texas style. It's probably going to be like a state fair. And the idea is that we go and explore some of Houston, and we go down onto the coast, which is called the Carcinogenic Coast. And that term comes from the Bernie movie that I was going to show, where the guy talks about it as the carcinogenic coast, because basically it's riddled with oil treatment plants, and it's pretty full on. So this is Galveston. So we're going to take the boat from Houston down the Houston Canal to Galveston, which was destroyed by, this is Galveston Island. So this is after Hurricane Ike back in 2008. So this is after Katrina. Katrina basically destroyed it, and then it got hit again in 2008. And as you can see, it looks a bit like Detroit, but created for a different reason, I think. So oil was discovered in the early 1900s in Beaumont. It became a prospecting area. And what we're fascinated by is what the architecture of the oil industry looks like. So it used to be onshore oil, so you got a lot of this. Nowadays it's basically refineries in Galveston where they bring all the oil from things like this. So I'm sure some of you have heard of this, Deepwater Horizon. This was another movie I could show you. So this is where BP got sued for billions of dollars because this oil rig leaked and then blew up in the Gulf of Mexico. So that movie doesn't work. That was the oil spillage that it created, which was the largest oil spill in Southern America, and they're still paying for it heavily. And after that, we're going to go to Dallas. So in Dallas, in DEALEY Plaza in 1963, something really important happened. This guy, JFK, was murdered by Lee Harvey Oswald, or maybe it was somebody else, who knows. It's still a conspiracy theory, but we're going to go to the grassy knoll and see where this happened. And then we're going to fly out back to England. And in the second term, we're going to go to Portugal, to Lisbon, for the weekend, to see some of old Europe. And the idea is, how does America exist in the modern world in comparison to old Europe? And if you know who Vasco da Gama is, and the likes of the explorers who left old Europe to discover America, this is where they came from. So the intention is we go and explore a little bit of old Europe and compare that to modern day failures of America. And from that, we're going to produce some work.
Just to close, we'll just show some examples of the work that students have done in the last year. And what I'll do is the closing clip, which is a homage to Rodeo from a Sam Peckinpah film, I'll put online. So if you're ever interested in seeing that, you can watch that. We can show it to you. So, of course, what we mainly do in the unit is we work in drawings. We're not averse to other media, but what we've been really keen on over the last few years is develop a whole kind of basis in drawing, exploring what drawing has to describe and to generate in architectural terms in the places we work. So once again this year we'll be doing that both as an internal discussion within the unit and then also with a series of people who are coming in. So we're really thankful CJ Lim from the Bartlett's going to come in and do another extensive workshop where he works on drawings. These are examples of his incredible drawings. This is some of the work in the unit last year that came out of those workshops. And then, of course, what we do is we look at ways in which to construct the image. So these are some sort of older collages that show the way in which they become a kind of way for us of thinking into the project. So this is Alex Paritsky's tremendous project from 2010, in which when we went to Greenville, the hotel only has brown water. And the way they explain this is that the Mississippi has flowed into the system, and in actuality the water is polluted. So what she did is in order to try and rescue the town, it's a charming project, she imagined what it would be if that water itself carried a kind of miracle with it, that of course could be commercially exploited like all kinds of miracles. So she began with these collages where she imagined what it would be to have that presence in relation to water, that she then developed up into a series of occupations across the town, bathhouses, saunas, of all kinds of varieties, shall we say. And then this is some of Naz's early drawings where she imagined what it would be to exist as a scientist under the Salton Sea when it flooded. These tremendous drawings. Some earlier ones. And from the Salton Sea. And then Lara's project where she imagined what it would be rather than rescuing all of Detroit was to simply bury it as a type of archive that could then be discovered by whomever. And I think it was 1,000 years, the span of her project. Detroit. Lorenzo's project, where also in response to Detroit, he looked at what it would be to re-inhabit the pack-out plant. So these are just, as I was saying, these are just examples of drawings that come out of the unit. Johnny's terrific project in which he, in order to rescue Detroit, he removed all of the religious architecture of Detroit and placed it in a bunker at the top of the Upper Peninsula in Upper Michigan. So these are just some of the really kind of evocative drawings he produced in order to describe that. This is a slightly more technical drawing. he did in order to show they all fitted, being proper. Some of the things from last year, and this is some of the work from last year that shows that relationship between the architectural and the natural and the way in which it can inform types of architectural thinking. So again, these are collages which are central to us and which then become more drawings, ways of thinking about things. Sebastian's project in which he imagined what it would be to sort of really forcefully intervene within the site of one of these, which he then, through demolition and through the kind of stripping out, takes this architecture back to a state which is kind of this really quite a incredibly evocative reimagination of what that site could be, and also too in terms of presence and memory and duration and temporality and these things that we often discuss. Because one of the very interesting things about these places we visit is they're incredibly fleeting. So they're not meant to last in a kind of European monumental way. They simply fall apart. So part of the unit is to question whether they should fall apart, or in this case, to monumentalize them as a type of commentary on what they could become. There's the Planet of the Apes shot. Or NA's project, which, as I was saying before, where he reimagines the town, recreated as a kind of fantasy for its inhabitants within this abandoned building. So these are a series of collages he produced that are a mixture between drawings and collages of famous American photographers, that's Eggleston, which he then worked up into, for those, they're in the show, but for those who've seen these astonishing A0 drawings that are highly detailed of the entire town with its sort of inner workings, its avatar, all of the kind of life and entity of this thing in this really introspective version. Diagram of it, these sections, which we'll see in a minute, and the details. So you can see here the kind of obvious attention to drawing and documentation and ways of thinking that we try and inspire in the design process. We try and work through. Final one there, and then just to close, this is his imagination of the town after it's been departed. There we go. There we go. And then a final, oh, that's not the play, sorry. That's the radio club. There we go, just close it. Veer's enormous drawings, file size. So this is one of our favourite ones from a few years ago, and this really speaks to that relationship between the landscape, the architectural, the people who inhabit it. So this is Veer, who received honours last year in Carlos's unit. This is the project she did with us, where she imagined a kind of domestic couple who lived in a harvester that she designed that swept across the Salton Sea in this kind of endless entropic arc of cultivation and destruction, which is a really kind of, it's not supposed to summarise the thing, but it's kind of really nice gesture of what we're after in the unit, is these kind of ways in which architecture, through, either being as forceful as someone like Seb's or as subtle as something like Veer's, can engage in these sort of really wonderful and complex environments that we find. Yeah, thank you.